Have you ever imagined that one day, just because of the color of your skin, you will be treated unfairly in the heart of the city? Today, we will follow a shocking story of racism in the legal system, where an innocent black woman was arrested by the police for a very silly reason. But what makes this story even more shocking is not the actions of the police, but the way this woman fought to expose this injustice and bring light to similar cases. Will justice be served, or is it just a play to protect the powerful? You will not believe what happens in the next part. This is a story of strength, perseverance, and justice. Don't miss the ending, where secrets are revealed and racists face justice. Please click subscribe to not miss any stories about the bloody struggles for justice and truth. Kayla Bennett never thought a typical Monday morning with her usual cup of coffee, her charcoal blazer, which she jokingly calls her armor of justice, and her determined stride up the steps of the federal courthouse would be the one that would define her entire life. She was a federal prosecutor with 19 years of experience leading landmark cases against organized violence, corrupt police gangs, and even state-level human rights abuses. She was not a novice. She was not a weakling. She was a voice of justice. But that day, her voice was muffled by a pair of cold handcuffs right in the middle of the grand hall, where she had read out verdicts that had changed the fate of entire communities. It happened in the blink of an eye, but it hurt like a lifetime. Kayla was talking to Judge Holloway, whom she had known for more than a decade, when two plainclothes officers approached. She didn't know them. She hadn't done anything wrong. "Ma'am, we have a witness report that you look like the suspect in a car burglary in the second-story parking lot," one of them said, without a hint of hesitation. She thought she'd misheard. "Excuse me," Kayla turned her eyes, barely shifting from surprise to annoyance. "I'm a federal prosecutor. I just finished a hearing this morning, right here in this courthouse. We're just following procedure, ma'am. Please put your hands behind your back." She looked at them, and she knew nothing. She said now would stop them from doing what they were about to do. They didn't ask for her name. They didn't ask for identification. They didn't need to know who she was, just that she had dark bronze skin. Her curly hair was tied back, and she walked with a confidence that to some was a thorn. The sound of the handcuffs clicking behind her was cold and hard, a slap to her career, her honor, her dignity. The great hall that had once been bustling with the footsteps of lawyers, judges, defendants, and law enforcement officers was now silent, as if someone had turned the volume down. Everyone looked at her, but no one stepped forward. No one stopped her. No one spoke. Kayla's eyes began to sting, not from pain, but from humiliation. A deep, silent humiliation. The kind of pain that didn't require screaming to tear at layers of self-esteem. They led her down the hallway, her high heels clicking on the tile floor like a twisted indictment. Portraits of famous judges hung on the walls now like ironic shadows following her. In the interrogation room, she was asked her name. Finally, "Kayla Bennett," she replied, her voice calm but dry. "Federal number 2489-31. I work here. I have high security clearance. I have access to the courthouse and the federal office." The officer nodded to his colleague, confusion flickering across his face. "We'll verify. If it's true, you'll be released immediately." She wanted to laugh, but she couldn't. She knew release did not mean exoneration. No one apologized. No one asked if she was okay. That wound, the wound of a law-abiding woman being seen as a lawbreaker, did not bleed, but it would be seared into her memory, her daughters, and the memories of countless other people of color who had dreamed of justice and received cold handcuffs in return. When she was released a few hours later, Kayla stepped outside. A crowd gathered, some whispering. A press officer took a sneaky photo of her on his phone. She said nothing. She just stood there, surrounded by prying, wary eyes, as if she carried something dangerous. And then a phone rang. Kayla. It was the voice of her mother, Geneva, the one who had told her as a child, "You have to be 3 times better than everyone else to be good enough." Kayla tried to hold it in, but her throat tightened. "I'm fine," she said. But no, she wasn't fine. Because for her, that morning was more than a wrongful arrest. It was a warning that no matter how high she climbed, how good she was, one look of prejudice would drag her back down to the bottom, and no one would question whether justice was served. And in that moment, a fire was lit. Not a fire of hatred, but a fire of determination. She will not be silent. She will not let this become a forgotten story in the internal files. She is Kayla Bennett. And this time, she will not only represent the law, she will demand justice for herself, and for all those who have been targeted not because of their sins, but because of the color of their skin. Memory is a cruel form of time. It doesn't pass, it resides. It lives in every breath, in the quiet moments that no one notices, and in the moments that seem to be asleep. Kayla Bennett, 42, a federal prosecutor who has arrested drug lords and money laundering bankers, was handcuffed in full view. But after that humiliation, the first thing that came back to her was not anger. It was the memory of when she was 9 years old, standing by the door of her classroom, clutching a certificate. Her eyes were shining with happiness, having just won the top student award in her English class. Her mother, Geneva, had been warning her all week. "If you get on stage, remember to smile. Smile big, smile like you know you deserve it." But the ceremony didn't end with a smile. While waiting for her mother to pick her up, she stood by the school gate, clutching her certificate, when 2 white boys in her class, Logan and Bryce, walked by. The older boy looked her up and down, snorting. "Your father must have been in jail, right? What black kid is good at English?" Kayla froze. Her face was red, not from embarrassment, but from anger. But she said nothing. Didn't cry. Didn't argue. Because she knew that if she got angry, she would be called aggressive. If she cried, she would be called weak. And if she tried to reason, she would just be laughed at, because what do black kids know? That day when she got in the car, she didn't tell her mother anything. But inside, something had quietly changed. A belief that no matter how good she was, there would always be people who wanted to deny her because of the color of her skin. "You must be so good because you cheated," or "How did someone like you get into college?" were not uncommon in her teenage years. And each time she didn't argue, she studied. She took exams. She read. And then she got ahead. But the truth is, sometimes people get ahead, not because they're stronger, but because they're tired of being looked down upon. Kayla's father, Terrence, was arrested when she was 6. He was charged with obstructing an officer in the execution of his duty, in an incident that essentially involved him standing in front of his house asking a police officer to show him a search warrant. There was no warrant, but he was pushed to the ground, his hands bleeding and dragged away into the night. Kayla didn't understand anything at the time, only that her mother was crying and screaming. He didn't do anything wrong. Then came the cold prison waiting room visits, the 5-minute phone calls with a countdown, and her mother's constant reminders. "Your dad is a good guy, but sometimes good guys get punished the wrong way." It was that injustice that planted the seeds of her dream of becoming a lawyer. "I'm going to study law," Kayla told her mother when she was 11, "so that no one can arrest my dad or anyone like him for being insubordinate." As she grew up, Kayla never let anyone see her stray. She was always neat, always on time, always exceeding her quota. But underneath the suit, behind that perfect record, was a woman scarred by her soul not from weakness, but from memories that were too strong. It was the wound that made her brave, but it also made her more vulnerable than anyone else. Because every time she was looked down upon, every time she was looked at with doubt, every time someone asked her, "Are you really qualified for this position?" all of it was like a knife cutting open old scars. The morning after the court case, Kayla sat in the kitchen holding a cup of hot tea, but her eyes were pensive. On the table was an email from her superior. "Yesterday's incident was an unfortunate misunderstanding. We will handle it internally. Please keep quiet to avoid media impact." Kayla smiled slightly. An unhappy smile. She had handled similar cases herself. She knew how they would end. Retraining the force. Private apology. Temporary suspension. Nothing had changed. And then in that quiet moment, she remembered her father's words after the last time she visited him before he passed away. "True justice is not sitting still when you are safe. It is speaking up when you are hurt. Kayla put down her teacup. She had been silent long enough. Childhood memories never die. They just lie dormant, waiting for the shock of the present to awaken them. The morning after her humiliating arrest in the middle of the courthouse, Kayla Bennett did not go to the office. She did not send a leave request, nor did she answer the phone call from her assistant or the message from her boss. Instead, she sat by the window of her 17th floor apartment, the light shining on the pages of unfinished documents, but her mind drifted far away. A rickety porch in Baltimore when she was 8 years old. When her father, Terrence Bennett, was taken away by the police that night, Kayla sat behind the curtains, silent as a shadow. No screams, no tears, but her young heart broke in silence. Her father was not a criminal. He was an unemployed civil engineer living frugally to support his wife and children after being unfairly fired from a large construction company. That day, he had only asked the police to read the search warrant before entering the house. But that firmness in the eyes of the person exercising power was a threat. Kayla had dreamed many times if her father had been softer. That day, had he given in? Would things have been different? But then she herself realized that softness was never enough if you were of a different skin color. From that moment on, Kayla lived with an invisible wound, the feeling of being targeted, stereotyped, and judged simply by her existence. At 14, when she was selected to represent her school in a state debate competition, her instructor told the class, "Kayla is an excellent student, but she will have to work twice as hard." Because the judges are not used to a colored girl talking about the law as fluently as a lawyer. That statement, though it was meant to be encouraging, planted a thorn in her heart. It said that her success would always be questioned. Not because of her ability, but because of her ethnicity. From then on, Kayla no longer simply studied to improve. She studied to survive. She studied to prove. But what was the price of always having to be perfect to be accepted? She lost her childhood, her innocent dreams, her right to stumble without being labeled a failure. After the arrest in court, Kayla thought about her mother, Geneva Bennett, who raised her alone for years, working as a night nurse and helping her study for exams. She once told Kayla something she would never forget. "You are not allowed to make mistakes like everyone else. If they fall, they will help them up. But if you fall, people will say you didn't deserve to start in the first place." Kayla lived by that reminder as a rule of survival. And now, at 42, as she sits over a cold cup of tea, watching over and over the leaked video, where she, a federal prosecutor, was forced to kneel in the middle of the aisle, her hands locked behind her back like a criminal. She sees more than just humiliation. She sees a long line of history repeating itself, from her father to her, and if nothing changes, to the next generation. Kayla opens a drawer and pulls out a small box. Inside are handwritten letters from her father in prison. The paper is yellowed, the handwriting is bold and black. The one letter she keeps in her wallet, the one she opens the most, reads, "Kayla, if you ever feel like the odds are stacked against you, remember, you are not alone. What happened to me was not my fault, nor was it fate. It was the product of a system that needs to be fixed, and you can be the one to fix it." She held the letter, her hand shaking slightly. Her eyes began to waver, not because of weakness, but because of a belief that had been suppressed for too long. She had thought that as long as she was good, if she didn't make mistakes, she wouldn't be hurt like her father. But the truth was, her good qualities couldn't stop those cold handcuffs. That silent emotion now turned into fire. Kayla stood up. She looked into the mirror. The woman in the mirror was no longer the little girl standing at the school gate. No longer the child hiding her tears in her pillow. She was Kayla Bennett. The one who had won dozens of the most complicated lawsuits in America. The one who had fought with the most arrogant lawyers, and now the one who would not be silent, would not bow her head, would not give up. Kayla Bennett was no longer the woman of silence. After her humiliating arrest in court, anger was no longer just a vague emotion. It was distilled into action. Everything seemed to have passed the point of return. and Kayla knew it was time to turn the pages that people wanted to forget. She would not just be a witness to injustice. She would expose it all, even if it meant facing danger. When she left her apartment that morning, there was no clear plan in mind, only a strong urge to do something. The courthouse was still where she worked every day, but now everything had changed. Her steps were heavy now, but determined. Kayla was no longer just a prosecutor. She had become the one who would rebuild the broken foundations of justice. Searching for the truth in the dark pits, Kayla did not return to the office the next day. Instead, she embarked on a different journey, that of someone pushed to the fringes of the system, but with the power and ability to expose the secrets they kept hidden. She began to see things differently. As a prosecutor, she had stood in courtrooms filled with power and judgment. But now she began to see that the truth could not always be found within the confines of the law. The truth lay in forgotten files, unrecorded calls, and silenced words. Where did she begin? One morning, Kayla sat in her office light, streaming through the windows overlooking the city. She pulled open a desk drawer and pulled out a thick file marked with lifeless numbers and letters. These were documents about Tier 12, a system she had been unable to stop thinking about since she had discovered it in her case. Tier 12 was a term she had never heard of before, but now it was the key word that led her to a deeper look into what was happening in Detroit's legal system. Kayla had no idea that there was a secret system that could destroy not only individuals, but also their futures. Everything was not only hidden under the cloak of power, but also protected by vague regulations. The dangerous files. The pages of the files were torn apart in Kayla's mind as she read. The documents she encountered seemed to be more than just numbers or names. They were fates. Individuals were placed on the Tier 12 list, not because of their crimes, but simply because they lived in a high-crime area, or even because they were normal activities in their community. This is racism, hidden in the mask of a data management tool where power is invisible but still controls everything. Kayla picked up one of the files of those labeled Tier 12, and she felt a shiver run down her spine. She couldn't help but think of Asha Wilkins, the 15-year-old girl who had been missing for 3 weeks without any reasonable explanation from the police or the authorities. A classic case of this system. A child cast aside simply because she was born in a neighborhood deemed dangerous. The pressure mounted. As Kayla continued to dig deeper into these files and documents, she began to feel a strong urge. It wasn't just for her career, but because the pieces were starting to form a larger picture, one that could completely change the way society viewed justice. She could see clearly the system was not a mistake, but a tool that had been fine-tuned and used to keep power in the hands of those who could control it. People like Gerald Falner and Trent Harland, the silent keepers of the community, the ones who wove this web of secrecy and protected it from the light, facing the darkness. Late one afternoon, after everyone had left, Kayla stood alone in her office, holding a pen in her hand, her finger pressing down hard on the tip, as if to emphasize her determination. She would not compromise. The system had to be broken, and she was the only one with the power to do it. She turned on her computer again, connecting to the office intranet. A message from the security department popped up. Access to confidential documents has been logged. This access will be monitored. But Kayla did not back down. She would not let fear stop her, determined not to be defeated. Kayla began to unlock the codes to extract each document, each email hidden in the files. These pieces would not only lead her to the people involved, but also open up a major investigation, a struggle that she knew, if failed, would forever be hidden under the worship of power. The first step on this difficult path, each document, each piece of information revealed to Kayla, felt like she was entering a dark universe filled with shadows, that only the light of truth could dispel. There was no turning back. She had to continue. And she knew that this journey would change not only her, but everyone who had been crushed by the system. Kayla knew that this was only the first step in a long battle, but nothing could stop her. She had begun to uncover the fragments of truth, and once they were put together, nothing could stop their power. Kayla stood up, her eyes as sharp as a sword. She was no hero of legend, but she was sure that she would be the one to rewrite her own story. A story not of defeat, but of resilience and determination to change the world. After long nights of work, Kayla Bennett has collected an incredible amount of documents. Every time she opens a new file, she feels a heavy burden of guilt on her heart. Names, events, people that she thought she would never know, appear clearly before her eyes, but the truth is not easy to accept, and what Kayla is discovering is not only hidden secrets, but also unpredictable consequences that can change her life forever. Threats from the Dark One. Evening. As Kayla sat in her small apartment studying the documents she had collected from various sources, a small sound from outside the window startled her. It was a small noise, as if someone was standing outside watching. Kayla quickly turned off the computer, her eyes quickly scanning the surroundings. She no longer felt safe in her own home. Everything around her was no longer just a job, a career. It had become a life-or-death struggle. And Kayla knew that every step she took, every document she uncovered, was making her a target. Just then, an anonymous phone call rang out. She picked up the phone, hearing a cold, emotionless voice. "If you continue, Kayla, you will never see the light again." Kayla's heart pounded in her chest. She realized that she was not only fighting an invisible system, but also confronting real dark forces. The defenders of this system were unforgiving. Kayla knew that she was standing at a crucial crossroads in her life, facing the truth. The next morning, when Kayla woke up, she noticed a black envelope on the windowsill. Opening it, she found a brief yet powerful letter that shook her. "You don't know who you're dealing with. It will all end soon." Kayla's hands shook as she picked up the letter. The threats were no longer empty words. They were watching her, knowing her every move. She knew that if she continued, she could lose everything from her career to her life. But what made her decide not to back down was that the truth could not be hidden forever. What she had seen in the documents about the Tier 12 system, the names and events that made it clear that the system was not just a mistake, but part of a larger plan. She knew she couldn't give up. She couldn't stop. With her mind on edge, Kayla continued to approach new sources. Each piece of information she gathered only seemed to increase the tension in her heart. Yet in all this, Kayla realized that she was not alone. People in the community began to talk about Tier 12, and calls from those affected began to pour in. A wave of truth seekers was spreading, and Kayla knew she could not stand aside. Resistance from those who really have power. One of the first people Kayla decided to approach was Gerald Falner, one of the city's top officials. Falner was said to have deep connections with the police forces and the organizations behind the Tier 12 system. He was the person she trusted to provide her with important information that would help her break through the hidden secrets. But Falner was not an easy person to approach. When Kayla invited him to a private meeting to discuss the information she had gathered, he looked at her coldly, as if he knew what she was coming for. "You're on the wrong track, Kayla. What you're looking for isn't what you want to know." Kayla felt a chill wash over the room. She couldn't believe that the person she was trying to work with could be so unsettling, but she wouldn't give up. She kept following him, kept searching for clues despite his warnings, and the shadows she couldn't see. The price of decision. Kayla was about to make a decision that would change everything. She couldn't continue working in the shadows without exposing the truth. There was a price to pay for sure, But the price she would pay wasn't just her career or her personal life. It was everything she believed in. And as she began to realize that she had entered a game from which there was no turning back, she knew she was no longer an ordinary prosecutor. Kayla Bennett has become a stand-in for authority, a stand-up against crime and cover-ups that even the most powerful people in the city dare not touch. Kayla Bennett walked out of the office with an indescribable sense of unease. Tonight she faced a mission of great importance, not just to expose a system, but to confront the pain of a family that has endured the silence and oblivion of society. Asha Wilkins, a 15-year-old girl, had been missing for 3 weeks, unknown to anyone. Unreported, unsearched, Asha's story was like a wound that no one wanted to open, no one wanted to face. But today, Kayla decided to do just that. To open the silence, to end the nameless pain. Asha's story. 3 weeks without any information. 3 weeks without anyone knowing where Asha was, what she was doing, or if she was even alive. Simply because she was one of those swept away and discarded by the racist system. One day, while Asha was on her way to school, the police stopped her on the vague grounds. She looked like someone who was being stalked. A vague and frightening excuse. She had done nothing wrong, committed no crime, simply walked to school carrying an ordinary backpack. But that day, everything changed. Asha was arrested without reason, without record, without formal report. Her mother, Evelyn Wilkins, for 3 weeks received no phone call, no explanation, no notice from the police, despite her repeated calls, even going to the police station, where every officer refused to provide information. Suffering for 3 weeks in silence, Evelyn became a model for mothers who are not heard, who are blinded and silenced by the system. The mother's pain was compounded by the knowledge that her daughter might have been treated as a criminal simply because she lived in a poor neighborhood where your ethnicity and where you live determined whether you were a target for surveillance or not. Asha returns, but not herself. 3 weeks later, Asha suddenly returned home, but she was no longer the smiling, innocent girl she had been. She walked into the house at 3 a.m., her hair disheveled, her clothes covered in mud, her eyes swollen as if the events of the past 3 weeks had buried all her memories and joy. When Evelyn asked about what had happened, Asha remained silent, unable to speak of what she had endured. She no longer wanted to see anyone, did not want to leave her room, and only the erased memories remained in her young mind. Asha said nothing, but Evelyn knew that her daughter had changed completely. The girl was no longer herself, and the pain of seeing her daughter alone and suffering kept her from sleeping. The family was left empty. No one dared to speak of the pain, too afraid that if they did, it would only exacerbate the trauma she had already endured. Kayla saw herself in Asha. When Kayla visited Evelyn Wilkins and heard Asha's story, she couldn't help but see herself in it. Kayla recalled her memories as a child facing racism, the pain of being ignored and marginalized. She knew what it felt like to be unseen, unappreciated, to be pushed into the shadows by the very system she hoped to change. As a prosecutor, Kayla had spent her life fighting for justice. But there was a part of her that had never truly faced the pain that weighed on her heart. Asha's story awakened her, reminding Kayla that it's not just the big cases or the important lawsuits that need her voice. Asha's pain, her loss, is a reminder that justice cannot be done if the forgotten have no one to stand up for them. Kayla vows to defend those who have disappeared into silence. Kayla is determined, after hearing Asha's story, to never let silence cover up those like Asha, those who have been crushed and disappeared into invisibility by the system. Asha is not an isolated case, but a symbol of all those who are left out, those who have no voice, those who are buried in files that are never opened. Kayla vows not to stop. She will defend those who have been silenced, those who have been robbed of their right to live in a just world. Now more than ever, she realizes that this fight is not just about the law, but about standing up for those who have no one to speak for them. Asha is Kayla's newfound motivation, an unstoppable force in the fight to bring justice and truth to those who have been buried by the system. With determination and a strong heart, Kayla is ready to step forward so that no Asha has to endure this silence and oblivion again. For justice for the forgotten and for Asha, Kayla will continue to fight. Never turning back, Kayla stood face to face with Gerald Falner, the head of the Tier 12 system, the man who had created and maintained a brutal surveillance regime, where people like Asha Wilkins were considered potential threats simply for living in a poor neighborhood where crime was commonplace. Falner's cold, piercing gaze was like a slap in the face to Kayla. She could feel the contempt coming from the other side. This man, the head of a powerful and cruel system, was fearless, unwavering. This isn't discrimination. This is order. Falner said, his voice icy, without a trace of tension or anxiety. This system needs control. We are building a safer society, one where people like Asha and those who live in these areas can never pose a threat to others. Kayla, her eyes dark, kept her gaze steady. She knew Falner was trying to convince her with false excuses, flowery words to protect the system he had built. But Kayla's determination did not change. She had not come here to hear excuses. She had come here to seek the truth. Order. Kayla repeated, her voice cold, like a sharp blade cutting through the tense space. The order you created is not to protect society, but to control and eliminate those who do not belong in your world. Gerald Falner's expression didn't change, but Kayla saw something in his eyes, a brief moment of complacency. He knew he had power, and he believed he could impose this system without anyone daring to resist. Kayla took a deep breath, feeling waves of tension rise in her body, but she didn't let her emotions get the better of her. She knew she was playing a long game, and every move had to be calculated. You call this order, but I see it as inhumanity, Kayla replied, her voice a blade ready to pierce Falner's veneer. This system not only destroys innocent people, it also forces entire communities into fear and powerlessness. What do you think about seeing children like Asha monitored simply because they were born in a poor area? Falner stood still, not responding immediately. He raised his head, running a hand through his tie, as if searching for the words to respond. This system is not for the weak, Kayla, he said, his eyes as confident and cold as ever. These people don't understand the need for order, and I'm just doing my job. Your job, Kayla smirked, unable to contain her laughter. Your job is to crush the weak, to make them lose their right to live an equal life. You are not a guardian of order. You are a tyrant in a world where people like you believe that power can decide everything. Kayla's words were like a slap in the face to Falner's cold face. He could not believe that someone like Kayla, a prosecutor who had been ostracized and ignored, would dare to confront him. And this confrontation was not just a battle between individuals, but a battle between justice and the brutality of the system. As the confrontation between them continued to rage, Kayla did not let a single moment pass in vain. She carefully recorded every word Falner said, recording it on a small device she had hidden in her sleeve. This was not just a normal conversation. Kayla knew that she needed proof. The accusations were not strong enough. She needed clear evidence to prove that Falner, the head of this system, was the source of the injustice she was fighting to destroy. Awareness and determination. Kayla knew that nothing in this battle would be easy. Falner, with all his power and arrogance, would not be easily defeated. But she also knew that this was an opportunity she could not pass up. Every word Falner said, every answer he gave was an important piece in the picture she was painting. With a cold look, Kayla took a deep breath, preparing to step into a larger battle. She knew that this fight was not just hers, but the fight of all those who had been crushed by the system. She would not let Falner get away with the crimes he had committed, and she would not stop until the truth was revealed and innocent people like Asha were brought to justice. "You will not win, Falner." Kayla said, her voice no longer filled with anger, but with a steely determination. "Because I will not stop until I bring justice to those you have destroyed." Falner looked at her silently for a long moment. A tense moment passed. Then he just smiled slightly, as if readying himself for a fight he was sure he would win. But Kayla did not back down. This was only the beginning. She would not let him get away with it so easily. The video of Kayla and Gerald Falner's confrontation went viral, making it impossible to ignore what was happening in the shadows. A truth that had previously been understood only by those involved was now brought into the light. Kayla was no longer the only one fighting. Now, an entire city was standing with her. The community, the people of Detroit, who had been on the sidelines, now found strength in the truth and solidarity. As soon as the video of the confrontation was shared on social media, it quickly became a phenomenon. Falner's chilling words, "This isn't about discrimination. This is about order," coupled with Kayla's determination, became a powerful rallying cry. The video not only attracted people interested in Asha's case, but also galvanized a generation hungry for change. The community saw the video as more than just a legal battle. It became a symbol of a larger fight, a fight against the system of injustice that has existed in society for so long. The video was shared across platforms from Facebook, Twitter, to Instagram, and YouTube. People not only watched it, but also shared their feelings, their comments, their own stories. The video became a voice for those who were kept in the shadows, who were afraid to speak up. It became a voice for the missing children, for the oppressed, for those who had been ignored by the system for so many years. Within days, a protest was held in downtown Detroit. This time it was not just a handful of people, but thousands of people. The community had realized the power of unity. Ordinary people took to the streets, holding signs, demanding justice, demanding change. Strong slogans rang out. "Justice for Asha. Don't be silent anymore. No more silence." They were no longer afraid, no longer felt powerless. They realized that change did not come from those in power, but from the community itself, from those who dared to speak up and not accept injustice. And then, not long after, a special event happened, causing the whole community to fall silent. Asha Wilkins, who had previously been just a name that everyone had heard, had now become a symbol of this struggle. A letter from Asha arrived, but it was not a long letter, simply a letter with short words, but full of emotion. "I cannot speak, but I want to be heard." These words, simple and rustic, were shocking. They were not just the voices of a missing girl, but the voices of those who had been robbed of their right to be heard. They were the voices of those who had no voice in society, those who had been left behind, while people like Falner continued to control and manipulate the system. And most importantly, they were voices of hope. Hope that those who could not speak would be heard. Kayla, with respect and determination, read Asha's letter to hundreds of people. She stood on a podium in the middle of a large crowd, holding the letter in her hand, and read those few words. The crowd fell silent. The applause stopped, and for a moment the air was filled with sadness and anger. But then, right after the applause, came back louder and more certain. The community was ready to stand up because they realized they were no longer alone. "Asha cannot speak, but we will be her voice," Kayla said, and the crowd erupted in applause. Tears were streaming down her cheeks, but they were tears of hope, of change coming. The community was no longer afraid, and they realized that change could only come from them. They no longer believed that the system alone could bring justice. The community saw clearly that they were the ones who could do it. Kayla felt a strong sense of pride inside her. Things were going right. The community was not just waking up. They were taking action. They were not just standing there cheering, they were fighting. And this fight would not stop until every child like Asha was heard, accepted, and recognized. "Thank you," Kayla said, her voice still shaking with emotion, but strong. "Thank you for standing up for Asha, for the missing children, and for all those who cannot speak. This fight is not just mine, it is ours." In that moment, Kayla felt something she had never felt before. This community had not just stood up for Asha, but for something greater. For justice, for truth, and for the right to be heard. And in this unity, they would leave no one behind. When Gerald Falner's recording played in the courtroom, the entire room fell silent, except for the cold words of the powerful. The way Falner uttered the words, "This is not segregation. This is order," was not only an open acknowledgement of racism, but also the look of a man who had lived so long in the ivory tower of power that he no longer realized he was so upset that he spoke in such a way. Every word he spoke carried a challenge, a blunt rejection of the efforts of Kayla and all those who were standing up against this unjust system. But that was when Kayla knew that the evidence that had been handed to her was not just a lifeless recording, but the key to breaking through the whole lie, to opening the door to a different future. The standoff in the courtroom was not just a confrontation between Kayla and Falner, but a battle of values of generations fighting against those who had lived too long under the protection of a system of power. Kayla looked into Falner's eyes, and in that moment she understood that not only her life, but also the lives of thousands, millions of people who had been and are still being oppressed by this system were in her hands. Kayla did not need to say another word. The evidence spoke for itself. What she needed to do now was to make sure that not only those in the courtroom heard, but that society as a whole heard she was not just a prosecutor. She was a person fighting a silence that had lasted too long. A person seeking truth in a world full of lies. And when she began to speak, everyone watching, not only in the courtroom but also outside, felt a new breath of air, a new hope beginning to burn. But the feeling of victory did not come immediately. Even though the evidence was clear, even though everyone in the room saw the truth, she knew that she was standing in a place where things had never been easier. To make people like Falner pay, she needed more than the truth. She needed more than that. She needed the power of the community of people who were ready to stand up and support justice. People out there who had once been anonymous ghosts in an unjust society were now real allies. The feeling of victory in Kayla's heart did not come from gloating, but from a feeling of both choking and happiness. She had overcome a big step, but it was only the beginning. What she felt most clearly was the pain of realizing how long this system had lasted, how cruel it had been to so many innocent people. The awakening she brought was not just justice for Asha, but for a generation that had been ignored, forgotten, and voiceless. This trial was not just about one person. It was about a system, a way of looking at society that had been entrenched for too long. Every step Kayla took throughout the trial, every word she spoke was not only a reflection of perseverance, but also a promise to those who had failed to stand up to those who had been silent for too long. She may not have changed everything at once, but she had made a lasting mark. The scene in that courtroom will never fade from the memories of those who witnessed it. The light of truth was slowly shining through the dark curtain of society. Everyone in the room felt it. They were not just waiting for a verdict from the court. They were waiting for a miracle, a sign that a society was no longer suffocated by absurdity and injustice. When the trial ended, Kayla stood up, faced the crowd, and saw the light of a new future. Those who stood up, who sent a powerful message through their words, were now more than just a group of isolated individuals. They had become a strong community, a community that realized that the truth cannot be buried, and that strong people like Kayla will always be the beacons that guide society through the darkness of discrimination, division, and oppression. She didn't know what the verdict would be, but she was ready for any decision. She knew that she had done her best, and no matter what the outcome, she would never regret standing up for the truth. In Kayla's eyes, today was the first step in a long journey, but she firmly believed that truth and justice would always prevail. And so Kayla didn't just change Asha Wilkins' life. She changed her own life, and that of her community. Her feeling wasn't one of simple satisfaction, but of pain and hope mixed together, a sense of a great awakening that everyone was beginning to notice. Every change, no matter how small, can create a big push, and today, that change began with Kayla. A woman who not only dared to face the pain, but also dared to stand up and push it back. Kayla Bennett sat in the living room of her small but cozy house, where the sunlight gently filtered through the windows, casting golden rays on the wooden floor. She looked at the picture her daughter Amara had just drawn. It was the image of a woman in a black suit looking stern, but also resilient. "I will be brave like you," the child wrote at the bottom of the picture, making Kayla's heart sink. She couldn't help but feel the depth in each stroke of her daughter's handwriting. A child who was only 7 years old, but could understand and appreciate what her mother had done. In Amara's eyes, Kayla was not just a mother, but a symbol of courage and perseverance. For Kayla, this was not just a moment of personal pride, but an affirmation of the value of what she had done. Throughout this arduous journey, Amara didn't just draw her mother on a small piece of paper. She is painting a new future where the values of justice, equality, and courage will continue to be preserved and promoted for generations to come. Each stroke of Amara's paint is a reminder of what has been achieved, but also a promise of what is yet to come. In Kayla's heart, Amara's final embrace is not the end, but the beginning of a new generation. A generation that no longer has to suffer injustice, no longer has to fear injustice because of their appearance or the color of their skin. She no longer has to fight alone. People like Amara, the children of the future, will continue to fight for a society without the scars of discrimination. And then, in the Capitol, the Morgan Act was officially enacted, marking an important milestone in Kayla's long and arduous journey. This is more than just a law of justice. It is a testament to the tireless perseverance of Kayla and all those who have stood up for justice. The handcuffs, the unjustified charges, and the lives taken away for looking like someone can no longer be easily passed. The Morgan Act, with Kayla's name on it, not only protects those who have been discriminated against in the past, but also serves as a barrier to future discrimination. Kayla stood there in the chamber of Congress, watching the ballots go in and hearing the applause. But the emotion in her eyes was not because she had won, but because those who have never had a voice were now being heard. Kayla understands that justice does not always come quickly, and it does not always come easily. But when it does, it will usher in a new era where every human being is treated fairly with the dignity and human rights they deserve. For her part, Kayla is not looking for praise. She is not looking for thanks or recognition. For her, this journey has never been about herself. It has been about those who have not been able to speak up about children like Amara, who can dream of a world where everyone is equal and no one has to suffer unjustly because of the color of their skin or their origin. Her happiness comes from seeing change, from seeing society changing in the direction that she and those who fought alongside her have always hoped for. Amara ran to her mother again, pulling her out of her deep thoughts. "Mom, I love that picture. I want to be like you when I grow up." Amara's innocent voice made Kayla smile, but inside a sense of pride welled up. Amara's mother had helped bring about great changes, and those changes would continue to shine through the generations to come. No end is ever really an end, because life will continue. Challenges will continue. But Kayla knew that she had done the most important thing in her life. She had created a legacy, an everlasting mark in the hearts of her people, so that no one would ever have to lose. No one would have to be silenced by oppression for reasons beyond their control. Kayla was more than a warrior in the legal battle. She was a symbol of love and sacrifice, and it was her courage that brought new hope to the next generation. As Kayla stepped out into the afternoon light, a new future was beginning. Amara, with her painting in hand, would be the one to continue this journey. She will be the next generation of people who love, who fight, and who never give up, because justice will not just be words, but will become a reality in every step they take. That is the legacy that Kayla Bennett has left the world. As she entered the living room, where the light from the chandelier hung in the middle of the ceiling fell, Kayla could not help but feel a deep sense of comfort. This was not the end of the journey, but the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter written by those who have stood up for justice, for truth. In this warm room, where every moment contained feelings of love and hope, Kayla knew that she had done what she had always dreamed of. The door closed, but another door opened. Every step she took, every challenging encounter was not only for her, but also for those who had silently suffered, those who had been oppressed, but had no voice. Everything had changed now. The whole community was awakening, standing up, not just for the victory of an individual, but for the victory of a more just society. She held Amara's hand tightly, then gently stroked her daughter's hair, feeling what she had given up. It was a long, difficult, and arduous journey, but the most beautiful ending was when she saw her daughter's eyes. Amara did not just see her mother as a warrior, but a woman who fought tirelessly to protect the core values of humanity. Kayla wanted Amara to understand that strength is not something that is innate, but the result of resilience, faith, and courage. The Morgan Act is not just a law, but an oath signed by Kayla and all those who fought. Not just a victory in the legal field, but a victory in the hearts of people, a victory in faith and respect for people. The painting that Amara painted is not just a work of art, but a reminder, something that will remain long after what Kayla has built. It is an indelible mark. Now, looking at that painting, Kayla sees that nothing is in vain. No sacrifice is meaningless. That painting is the embodiment of hope, the embodiment of the silent warriors who are now honored. Kayla can be proud that although things may still be challenging, at least she has changed a part of this world, and more importantly, she has passed that flame to Amara, who will continue to burn the limits that society once imposed. The world is no longer a place where people can easily play the role of oppressors, where discrimination and injustice can exist without being confronted. Change has come from courageous actions, resilient struggles, and people who never give up. Kayla knows that her legacy is not just what has been achieved, but what will be continued. She planted the seeds of a new generation. A generation where justice is not just an abstract concept, but a reality that is present in every action, every step, every decision of each individual. And in that moment, as Kayla held her daughter tightly, she understood. We are not just living for ourselves, but for those who will come after us, for future generations, for children who will never have to face the barriers she has experienced. That is the true legacy, the legacy of those who triumph in silence and fight to bring light into the dark corners of society. Kayla Bennett has left an indelible mark not only in the hearts of those who witnessed her fight, but in all those who have fought and will continue to fight for a more just world where no one is handcuffed just because they look like someone else. It is a gift to everyone, and especially to the younger generations, who will continue to walk the path of justice, never giving up, and never forgetting the sacrifices that made these victories possible. So that's the end of the story, but what we've just witnessed is just one of the many injustices that many Black people face every day in our society. The police who are charged with protecting and maintaining order do not distinguish between their power and their responsibility to justice. They see a person's skin color not as an individual, but as a potential criminal. Kayla and Asha's story is a powerful reminder that in this world, there are people who still have to fight every day to be seen as real people, not as a shadow of a force they cannot control. Police officers like Harlan once thought their power was limitless. They thought they could humiliate anyone, even the most honest citizens, just because they had skin color. But they were wrong. They don't know that real power doesn't come from handcuffs. It doesn't come from control. Real power comes from justice. It comes from the persistence of people like Kayla, people who are not afraid to face the cruelty of this system and fight to expose the truth. Surely, after reading this story, you feel an indescribable anger. How can we accept a system in which innocent people are treated as enemies? How can we let such incidents continue without doing anything? It is our indifference and silence combined with the passive acceptance of those in power that is maintaining an unjust world. And if we continue to be silent, there will be many more Kaylas, many more Ashas, innocent people who will suffer unjustly deprived of their rights. Reflect on what we have just witnessed. Do you want to live in a world where you can be mistreated because of the color of your skin, or will you stand up and say enough? Remember that every small action can create a big change. We cannot continue to let this system continue to dictate destinies. Today, you can make a difference. Click like if you are angry and can't stand this injustice anymore. Leave a comment to show your support for those who are fighting like Kayla, like Asha, and others who are suffering from racism. Because we can't just stand by. We have to speak up. And finally, don't forget to subscribe to receive more inspiring and powerful stories of people fighting for justice, resilient people who never give up. Every story you hear is not just a story, but a reminder that each of us can contribute to social change, no matter how small or large. Join us in this fight, to make the truth known, to make justice happen.